to the heart of my patch, right here in our great city of Birmingham. We have a very big year ahead of us in our city. In the year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, we are proud and excited to be hosts this summer. And I'm so pleased that we are kicking off 2022 with a speech from the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer.
Those future leaders. I would now like to welcome Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, to Birmingham.
Thank you, Callum. Thank you for those words. And thank you for what you do and for making a difference. Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. It's really great to be here in Birmingham, a birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And today, I want to do something that leaders of the opposition rarely do. I want to celebrate the country we live in. It's normally the job of the opposition to criticise and to oppose, but it can make us sound pretty miserable. It can make it sound as if we don't realise our own historic good fortune to have been born into a peaceful, creative, liberal democracy. Think of all that the British have to be proud of. The rule of law, Her Majesty the Queen, universal public services, a creative heritage that's the envy of the world, and a thriving civil society on which we relied so heavily during the pandemic. So to the delivery drivers who worked through the supply problems, the workers in the NHS, putting themselves in the line of danger, the care workers who made Christmas special, thank you. Today, I want to describe a government that might be worthy of you. One of the best characteristics of the British people is that we're fair-minded. Our instinct in a national crisis is to give the government the benefit of the doubt. And because the pandemic posed an unprecedented problem, we, Her Majesty's opposition, did the same. We supported where we could, we questioned where we had to. But the British people do not like being taken for granted, and they do not like being treated as fools. A government which refuses to follow the rules it sets for the rest of us loses the moral right to set those rules. So I think that as we begin this new year, Britain has entered a new phase. Because just as the government has revealed itself to be unworthy of your trust, its incompetence is becoming plain. The cost of living is increasing. Energy bills are going up. Wages are stagnant. Tax rises are coming in April. Too many people don't feel safe in their own streets. And good luck to anyone trying to get a quick GP appointment. So I want to start the new year by making a pledge of straight leadership. Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people. This will be that just because the Tories lose the public's trust, it doesn't mean that Labour simply inherits it. Trust has to be earned. I am confident, but not complacent, about the task ahead. So the very first clause in the contract is a binding commitment about decency and standards in public life. Of course those standards already exist. They're known as the Nolan principles: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. So my solemn promise to you will be always to run a government that honours these principles. I have a very clear idea of what a Labour government would look like. And in 2022, I want to take my plans to the British people. Now, I've spent a career working as a lawyer, so you're probably expecting about 1,000 clauses, 7 appendices, a list of definitions. Well, my contract won't be anything like that. It will be a contract based on three simple principles: security, prosperity, and respect. These are living principles, and that's why in the coming months I'll hold a series of events around the country to persuade people to sign up to this new Britain that we can create together. The first term in the contract is security. Everyone has the basic right to feel safe in their own community. We all need to know that the NHS is there for us when we need it, and that if we work hard, we should also have a right to job security. The second term in the contract is prosperity. Everyone should have the opportunity to thrive, to realise our ambitions and make a good life for ourselves, to have the skills we need to prosper. And then there is a third term in my contract. Respect is a less obvious political virtue than security on prosperity, but it's every bit as important. Everyone has the right to live in places we care for, to have our lives and ambitions taken seriously, to be valued for who we are and what we do. I want to create a contract defined by security, prosperity and respect. To create a contract for a government worthy of the fine nation in which we live. The Labour Party is a deeply patriotic party. Keir Hardie once said that British socialism must wear a local garb. He meant that British socialism was rooted in the everyday concerns of working people. The titans of 1945 were elected to power on the votes of the demobbed servicemen and women. That government took the spirit of collective sacrifice generated by the war and turned it into the National Health Service, for which we are so thankful today. It was a patriotic government which understood the importance of national defence, which created NATO, the alliance that has preserved the peace in Europe ever since, and gave this country its independent nuclear deterrent. The 1945 Labour government laid the foundations for the end of empire and the beginning of the modern Commonwealth. Under Wilson, the Open University extended higher education. The Race Relations Act of 1965 prohibited racial discrimination. Barbara Castle's Equal Pay Act was a watershed moment in the fight for gender equality. The Blair government introduced a national minimum wage and repaired the public services that had been neglected under the Tories. When I reflect on previous Labour governments, I have two thoughts. The first is, what a record we have. These three chapters of change, Attlee, Wilson and Blair, made Britain a better country. We must be the people who write the fourth chapter, the people who create a new Britain in the 21st century. And second, nobody could look on that record and say that Labour is not a patriotic party. Those Labour governments had the ambition to build a society in which everyone can contribute and everyone is valued, to extend security, prosperity and respect to all. This is the tradition we embrace and the mission we inherit. The first duty of government is the security of its citizens. I was once the country's leading prosecutor. Crime and antisocial behaviour are issues that matter to me personally. I've seen too many victims of crime, most of them not at all well off, not to know that security is a matter of social justice. That's why Labour will provide crime prevention teams in every neighbourhood. New police hubs will be visible in every community. We will introduce a new, tough approach to closing down drug dens with new powers for local police and local authorities. Security also means knowing that the NHS is there for you when you need it. And I'll be setting out a long-term plan to show how a Labour government will shift the emphasis from emergency care to preventing people getting sick in the first place. We will also ensure that people feel more secure at work by introducing the new protections for workers that Angela Rayner announced at our conference last year. For example, one of the things the pandemic has taught us is that everyone needs decent pay when they're sick. But that isn't the case for millions of British workers. I know of care workers looking after vulnerable people. That's not only unfair on them, it's unsafe for the country. Buy, make and sell more and to revive the places that made Britain wealthy. So, for example, at our conference, we pledged an extra £28 billion a year in capital investment to combat climate change, to create the next generation of jobs, and to inspire innovation for a clean future. And this promises a future to places that were once defined by what they made. Let me give you a flavour of what I think might be possible. Not long ago, I visited the Humber gasworks. The gas they stored helped to keep the prices low. But the government let it close in 2017. And you've seen what's happened to gas prices since. But the workers there are not looking to the past. They're convinced that with the right investment and government support, the Humber could become a hub for the production of hydrogen. These workers want to make a historic contribution to combating the climate crisis. They want to be in the vanguard of the next industrial revolution. All they need is a government that shares their ambition and runs with it. Of all the things Boris Johnson has done, the one that truly astonishes me was that a Prime Minister who claims to be interested in levelling up tore up their own industrial strategy. What an extraordinary act of self-harm. Labour would create 100,000 new start-up businesses and new hubs of excellence building on existing strengths, such as video gaming in Dundee, biopharma in Cambridgeshire. And here in Birmingham, there's Brando, which began life as a pen manufacturer and which now produces plates used in hydrogen fuel cells, a technology that could help to power lorries to have new zero emissions. In each of these examples, new technology is being used imaginatively to create prosperity. But that prosperous future is only possible if we equip our people properly. This country has always made a world-class offer to a small section of society and a substandard offer to those who do not take the academic course. So it'll be a vital clause in my contract with the British people and the task for my Skills Advisory Council to ensure that the next generation of students is ready for work and ready for life. I believe passionately that everyone has the right to be treated with respect. No places should be left behind, and nobody should be treated as if they don't matter. And I know this can happen. I saw it with my dad. My dad always felt undervalued because he worked in a factory. He felt people looked down on him, and he wasn't wrong about that. People have their dignity, and it needs to be respected. I want to live in a country in which crucial skills are valued, in which everyone is respected for what they contribute. And in Britain, we make and we will always play by the rules. I regard the rule of law as one of the things that makes Britain great. Due process, treating institutions with respect. The integrity of British justice has always been the envy of the world, and it's always been a big part in our economic success. A good reason to do business in Britain is that you know a contract will be respected, and that respect underwrites your investment. That's why doing the right thing, things in the right way matters as much as doing the right things. And this year I will set out what I mean by respect, what it demands of government and what it demands of all of us. Because any successful contract is a two-way deal. You can expect access to high-quality healthcare, but there will be zero tolerance of abuse towards NHS staff. You can expect the opportunity to acquire new skills, but you will be expected to work hard and do your bit. You can expect better neighbourhood policing, but you will be expected to behave like good neighbours in your own community too. I believe that these values, security, prosperity and respect, unite the whole of the United Kingdom. The UK is a unique construct of 4 distinct national identities. It's complex, and it can easily be exploited for political gain, as we have seen. In Northern Ireland, the government is playing fast and loose with the peace process as the price for getting Brexit done. And a reckless government in Westminster that doesn't seem to care about what happens in Scotland erodes people's faith in our common bonds. But I believe in our union of nations. I believe we are better together than any of us would be apart. I believe that each nation can speak with a progressive voice, but we do need a new and durable constitutional settlement, which is why I'm delighted that Gordon Brown's Commission on the future of the UK will chart a new course for our union of nations. Security, prosperity and respect. These are the values that should inform Britain's role in the world. I'm determined that Britain should profit from our strong global relationships. That means not just getting Brexit done, but making Brexit work. When I spoke at the CBI last November, I described how we would approach this. Making Brexit work is painstaking work, and slogans won't cut it. My goals will be to repair the alliances that this government has damaged, whilst also ensuring that our borders remain safe and secure. The contract I want to agree with the British people is motivated by a desire to bring the country together. We don't bind a nation by emphasising what divides us. We build a nation from the common bonds between us. Our high streets, our community centres, our places of worship, the spaces that we share. The Labour Party is not a nationalist party, but it is a national party, because a nation gives us a place to belong. We're all shaped by the landscape and the villages, the towns and the cities where we live. For me, a football stadium will always be at the heart of any community. These are the places that give our lives meaning, that shape our identities, the businesses, the pubs, the shops, the places of worship in which our lives unfold. This is a remarkable nation with an extraordinary cultural heritage. British music, British fashion, British advertising, British acting, the soft diplomatic power wielded by the BBC, the world's greatest broadcaster, which enjoys its centenary this year. I think too of the scientists whose wisdom is guiding us through the pandemic, our world-class industries in pharmaceuticals and financial services, universities which are a magnet for the best students the world over. There is so much of which we could be proud. I'm personally thankful that I grew up in a country which had a national care service, a national health service, to provide for my mum when she needed it, that gave me the opportunity to go to university and to become a lawyer to fight for what is right. This country has presented me with great opportunities. It's a great place to live. But I don't think you cease to be patriotic because you notice your country has flaws. On the contrary, the reason we in the Labour Party want to correct those flaws is precisely because we are patriotic. I came into politics to make things happen, not just to talk about them. I don't think politics is a branch of the entertainment industry. I think it's the serious business of getting things done. But I'm afraid at the moment we're going backwards. We have a Prime Minister who thinks the rules apply to anyone but him. Just when trust in the government has become a matter of life and death, for this Prime Minister it's become a matter of what he can get away with. I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of people who missed family funerals because they were abiding by the rules. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister was at a cheese and wine party in Downing Street. And let's be clear, it's the party that is the problem. This is not about the flaws of one individual. It's about the flaws of a whole style of government, the flaws of an ideology, of a political party that's been in power for too long. After 12 years in power, while the country is trying to stay safe and to make ends meet, the Tory party is gearing up for a leadership fight, too busy squabbling over their leadership to provide any. Meanwhile, the real problems that people face are just ignored. People need solutions. People are struggling. This government is simply turning away. This year, 2022, is a big year. It's Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. This city is looking forward to hosting the Commonwealth Games. We will host the Women's Euros, and our men's teams will compete in the World Cup, which gives us an opportunity, as there was in the European Championships last year, to glimpse the open, the generous, the tolerant nation that we are at our best. The England team is a living embodiment of a successful nation. Young men of many backgrounds, united by their talent and their patriotic pride. I want to lead a government that does right by them. I want to create a national community in which everyone feels secure and everyone feels that they belong. The Britain I want is a country in which those who contribute get something back. Because 2022 is also the first year in which we tackle some really big challenges. Repairing after the pandemic, combating the climate crisis, making Brexit work. I believe that the best still lies ahead for this country, but only if we have the courage to create a new Britain. A country in which you and your family get the security, the prosperity, and the respect that you deserve. My contract with the British people will set out how we can create that new Britain. Thank you for listening, and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you. I'll now take some questions from the press. Vicky, starting with you, if I may. I think there's a roving mic that needs to just make its way to you.
Vicky Young, BBC News. If I could ask you a couple of questions, if that's all right. First of all, on COVID...
I don't think I've got a choice, Vicky.
No, you don't. First of all, on COVID, do you think the government is right to stick to Plan B in England, meaning no further restrictions, or do you think more should be done very often? But some people want to know...
On the question of Plan B, the first thing I'd say about Plan B is we wouldn't have those restrictions in place if the Labour Party hadn't voted them in the national interest, because the Prime Minister was too weak to bring in the measures that he needed. Now, we hope that we don't need further restrictions. Obviously, there's cause for concern looking at the numbers. But I firmly believe, and I think today is a classic example of that, it's the first day back to school for many children. We need better leadership from the government because if we're to keep our schools open, and we must, what we need is many more of our school children vaccinated. Only about half of those over 12 who are eligible to be vaccinated have been vaccinated. We said to the government, use the Christmas period to vaccinate those children. We need much better ventilation. We've been saying this for about a year to stop the virus spreading in schools. The government's now come up with, I think, something like 7,000 ventilators, which is about 1 in 4 for all the schools that need it. And their answer for the other 3 in 4 is, if you put your coat on and open the windows and a mask on, it may be freezing, but you can just about get on with learning. Now, 2 years into a pandemic, that is completely unacceptable. And the third thing is we need mass testing in schools. The government says, and it's right to say, we need tests twice a week for those in secondary school, but they're nowhere near achieving that on the numbers they were doing in December. And I think they need to go further so that if there's an outbreak in a school or as an individual case, we can't go back to having bubbles or classes all going home. Children spent far too much time out of school for that. So we need mass testing where if you're a contact of a school child, you take a test, If it is positive, you go home. If it's negative, you stay at school so that we keep our children in schools. On the second question about the flag, 2 points in relation to that. Firstly, I'm very proud to stand in front of the flag. I've done it many times before, including when I was Director of Public Prosecutions representing our country 10 years ago. So I've always been very proud to do so. But it's not just the flag that drives our patriotism. As I said in the speech, it's really the values that lie behind that, the values I've outlined today of security, of prosperity, and respect. They're the 3 values that lie behind patriotism as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Vicky. Anushka, I think we're coming to you.
Thank you. I'll also go for 2 questions, if okay, and start on
You see, you said as president now, Vicky.
It's not just schools that are problematic at the moment. We've got huge staff shortages because of sickness across hospitals, schools, and in many areas where we've got key workers who we need right now to prevent chaos. I mean, you've tended to support the government in many areas on COVID, but I want to understand what you as a party would do about this right now. Would you break from the government and call for the isolation period to be reduced from 7 to 5 days, like in the US? And if not, what would you do to prevent the chaos? And just pushing on Vicky's point, you say you're a national party, not a nationalist party. What does that mean in policy terms?
Anushka, on the COVID question, I do think that the mass testing is now a really important part of the way forward so that we can separate as quickly as possible those that are infected and those that aren't, and make sure that we keep the 2 apart. Now, a lot of these cases are asymptomatic. Many of these cases are asymptomatic. It's crucial that's done as much as possible. Now, it is simply unacceptable 2 years, best part of 2 years into a pandemic, for the government to say we haven't got enough tests. Lateral flow tests ought to be available in sufficient quantity to deal with the situation we now find ourselves in. Omicron was a word we hadn't heard several weeks ago, but the idea that there would be a variant that would get round some of the protections in place was a known threat 6 months ago. So that is not an excuse for the government not to have got the mass testing in place. On the 5-day period, we've always taken the approach of following the science. If the scientific advice is that it's possible to go down to 5 days, then we would support it. But we've followed the science on this rather than gone out on our own. In terms of the policies behind us being a national party, well, many of those were shown at our party conference, where we made a very clear commitment in relation to housing and adequate housing and affordable housing, made a very strong commitment to employment rights on day one, the respect point that I was making, a very, very clear commitment to £28 billion a year over 10 years to invest in the jobs of the future. And then I myself set out the 4 sort of future-looking grounds for our policy. So the argument that the Labour Party hasn't really set out any base policy ground isn't really a valid argument. What I'm doing today is setting out the future look for this year, facing the challenges that we've got. And we have got big challenges, but there are also big opportunities, I think, for us, if we're prepared to take them in the interest of our country. Thank you, Anushka. I've got the press station, which I think is Richard.
It was travelled widely that Martin Lewis, the consumer champion, had said people would have a choice this year if push came to shove between heating and eating. And I note that you took in the energy crisis, the price of energy crisis. I just wonder what you think the government could do to ameliorate that. And then secondly, if people are being asked to take your word, your contract, your pledge, people might be slightly concerned, would they, that during the leadership election, which you won, you mentioned nationalisation of the energy industry, abolition of the House of Lords, and seem to have gone silent on that. Is it just more talk from Labour, and all of this will go out the window if you do get into power? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Firstly, on the cost of living, I think this is very quickly going to become the major story of this winter and this spring, because there's a real cost of living crisis. there are too many elements of it almost to list. You've got inflation, you've got food prices going up, fuel prices going up, you've got stagnant wages, and there's obviously the energy price gap is about to change in just a few weeks' time. And at that very moment, the government decides to put up tax on working families, or to introduce it in April. Of all the things that makes the cost of living crisis worse, it's that. What we've said is, firstly, we wouldn't have put those taxes on working people just at this moment in that way. It's completely the wrong thing to do, which is why we voted against it. But also, there are practical measures like cutting the VAT on energy prices, which we called for months ago, could have been done this winter. It would be a very quick and effective way of actually reducing the cost to many working families across the country. So there are things that could have been done. On the pledges, look, there are important pledges I made in the leadership, and I stand by those pledges. There are important pledges I'm making this morning. What I'm setting out this morning is a contract between the government that I think people are entitled to expect and, you know, the values that underpin it. And that's my idea. That's what I want to take out. It's what I strongly believe a Labour government should deliver. I want to take that out now and talk to the British people about it. We'll be going around the country doing so. Thank you, Richard. Aletha from the Mirror, I think we've got.
Thank you, Sir Keir. It's Aletha Addy from the Mirror. You promised Brits security and prosperity, but we're seeing COVID wreaking havoc across our communities, across the country. Why are you not calling for more tougher restrictions that will give people some more certainty in their lives so they're not fearing the worst? And also, what do you think is more of an immediate priority? Easing energy bills so that families can sort of prepare on whether they need to be, you know, feeding their children or paying their energy bills, as we're expecting the worst in April? Or should we be pursuing net zero? And just finally, our Prime Minister has been accused by many of being a serial liar and having a complete disregard for the rules. Do you think it would be just for him to eventually be knighted, as Sir Tony has? Thank you.
I think you've now squeezed it to 3. I can see that this is going to get out of hand. Look, on the restrictions, we have always said we'll be guided by the science. And that's why we voted for the Plan B restrictions just before Christmas. And a good thing too, because the Prime Minister is now so weak that he couldn't have got public health provisions over the line on his own votes in Parliament. And so we follow the science on this. I do think, as I've set out, that mass testing has to play a massive part in what comes next, particularly with this particular variant. And I think many parents would be absolutely astonished. There's lots of things about the variant, about the virus that we don't understand, but we do understand that school terms come and go, and you need to be ready the first week of the first term of school for what lies ahead. And the fact that we're even having a discussion about vaccinations not having been carried out, ventilation not having been carried out, and mass testing not being available, I think will leave many parents feeling absolutely exacerbated with the government. On the choice between energy bills and net zero, I don't think it is a choice. I think we can and we should have the ambition to have both. One of the things that struck me most in the last 12 months or so was going to Scotland to see the biggest onshore wind farm of 250 turbines, generating enough electricity for many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of houses at very low cost. And I asked the people running the wind farm how many of these wind turbines then were built in Britain. They said none of them. And I said, why not? And they said, because 10 years ago the government didn't have the ambition to invest in this strategically, and therefore it went to another country. So it's not an either or, it's actually having ambition about your country and having clarity and planning. And it's why the sort of chaos of Johnson versus the sort of the planning that you saw in previous Labour governments and that you'll get in the next Labour government is such an important distinction. And no, I'm sorry, I do not think that this Prime Minister has earned the right to have an honour. I do think Tony Blair has. Thank you very much, Aletha. Aubrey, please.
Good morning, Sir Keir. Aubrey Algrassi from The Guardian. You've promised to set out a positive vision for the future of the UK, more defined by Labour proposals rather than opposition to Conservative ones. Values, which is what you've been speaking about today, are obviously important, but people also want policies to vote for. what are some of the things you're going to focus on in 2022 so that people more enthusiastically switch to Labour rather than viewing you as the less worst choice? And on COVID briefly, the head of the JCVI has signalled their opposition to everyone in the UK having a fourth jab, saying it's not sustainable. Do you agree?
Aubrey, on the signature policies so far, I don't think they could be more Labour. So a housing policy that says we need to redefine affordable housing, which has been wrongly defined, in my view, for many years and deprives people of actually affordable housing, and a policy that says that foreign investors shouldn't be able to buy homes as assets ahead of first-time buyers in this country. That is distinctively Labour, and very proud Labour too. Employment rights on day one is the strongest employment security measure that any Labour party has ever come up with, a very Labour position. And don't forget, this government was promising for year after year after year there'll be employment rights coming around the corner. They're always coming around the corner. They never actually arrive. So very, very Labour. And then the £28 billion a year investment in the green jobs of the future is again, very Labour. It's the complete opposite of what we've had from this government. Those wind farms have not been built in Scotland because this government didn't have a 10-year strategy, the like of which we unveiled in our conference. They're very strong, they're very Labour, and what I want to do this year, in the way I've suggested through this contract, is to build on that and take those ideas to the country and invite people to sign up to this vision of a new Britain coming out of the pandemic. On the fourth jab, look, I mean, we will study all of the available evidence. We will talk to the scientists, we talk to the government scientists, and we talk to our own scientists. And we'll come to the appropriate judgment call when we've studied all of that evidence, as we have always tried to do. Andrew from The Independent.
Andy Woodcock from The Independent. You mentioned three previous Labour leaders in your speech who you'd like to emulate, Attlee, Wilson and Blair. But you didn't mention some other Labour leaders in the past, including Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of your membership in the Labour Party will say that they elected you as leader on the basis of the 10 pledges to carry on with the Corbynite agenda, that they now feel that you've attempted to be elected leader as a Corbynite and now to fight a general election as a follower of Tony Blair. Is that a fair criticism, and is it a criticism you welcome because it tells the world out there that you're not Jeremy Corbyn? And also, if I could just ask, the electoral arithmetic means that if you do well in the next election, even if you're the largest single party, you're likely to have to rely on the Scottish Nationalists for support. What would your attitude be towards Nicola Sturgeon if she looks for a coalition on the basis of an independence referendum?
Well, as I've said before, no deal with the SNP going into an election, no deal with the SNP coming out of an election. Very clear about that. But listen, I don't apologise for mentioning Attlee, Wilson and Blair. The thing that unites those three very different prime ministers is that they all won. They all won. They introduced Labour governments that changed Britain for the better. And I want to be the fourth in that list, writing the next chapter of our history. So I have always cited Attlee, Wilson and Blair precisely because they won. And unless the Labour Party is absolutely clear that our whole purpose as a party is to win power to govern, to change the lives of millions of people, then we will be talking politics and not doing politics. So no apology about that at all. Thank you, Andy. I think I've got Ree from the Birmingham Mail.
Hi, thank you very much. So just around the corner here is a COVID-19 vaccination centre. Only a third of the population here in Birmingham have taken up their boosters, and 66% have had their first dose. With our ambulances services at its highest ever alert, what would you be doing differently? And I've just got a quick question on the cost of living crisis. You know, we've got some of the most deprived wards here in Birmingham. You've got Ladywood, you've got Smethwick, you've got Wolverhampton. What policies are you set to introduce to alleviate this? Thank you.
Thanks, Ree. Vicky, you see what you started now. Everybody's going for multiple questions. Look, in relation to vaccinations, I want to be really clear to everybody who hasn't had their first or second vaccination or the booster to go and get it. It's so important. All of the scientific evidence shows that it's the single most effective protection that we can have, either to getting the virus or in relation to the severity of the virus. So we need to keep on saying to people, get the vaccine. I'm a strong supporter in support and encouragement and cajoling people to do so. And that's why it's very important that here in Birmingham and other places, we use our community leaders to help with that messaging, all different kinds of community leaders, faith leaders included, to give the support to people to come forward, because it is the single most effective thing. I should also say at the same time, we need to deal with some of these anti-vaxxers. We've said to the government that they need to take stronger action in relation to anti-vaxxers. It is simply unacceptable to have anti-vaxxers outside schools shouting at school children going into school to have their vaccination, or to see some of the activities we've seen. So both of those things. In relation to the cost of living and what we can do, there are practical measures we can do right here, right now, which is cutting energy bills, etc., not imposing new taxes. But the long term has to be about a strategic view of the economy that has growth at its heart. This government, and this is probably the most serious failing of this government, is a high prices, high tax, low growth government. And that is the nub of the problem for the government. So that's why our ambition to invest in the future jobs and to grow the economy is hugely, hugely important on a medium to longer term basis. Alex from local radio. Nope. And I think I've got Tony from the Telegraph then. Hi, Tony.
Hi, thanks, Keir. You've always said that you're against the decriminalisation of drugs in England, and today, in your speech just now, you've pledged a tough new approach with powers for local police. But today we've reported that Sadiq Khan, the Labour London Mayor, is looking at a scheme to stop arresting and prosecuting young people who are caught with Class B drugs in London. So do you support that approach now, or is your own party split on drugs reform? And have you spoken to Sadiq about it? And can I also just ask on Wales? Over in Wales, people are still living under alert level 2, where they can be fined for going to work if they could work from home. And the number of people who can eat in restaurants is restricted, and all those sorts of restrictions that we remember from last year in England. Do you think that Mark Drakeford's policy there is too restrictive? And what do you think justifies tougher restrictions there that don't apply here? Because it seems that so far you've supported what the government's doing here, and that's quite different.
Yeah, look, on the drugs legislation, I've said a number of times, and I say again, I'm not in favour of us changing the law or decriminalisation, and I'm very clear about that. I haven't seen the detail of the proposals that you've reported on. As I understand it, they're early measures, they're some sort of pilots. Obviously, we'll look at those, but I'm very clear that we're not in favour of changing the drugs laws, and that's why I said what I said in my speech. As far as Wales is concerned, obviously each country, each nation has to try to get the balance right according to the threats and concerns as they see it. Mark Drakeford, I think, has led Wales very well during this pandemic. I have no doubt that's among the reasons that Welsh Labour did so well in the elections of last year. I talk to Mark Drakeford all the time, and I know just how seriously he takes those measures. Thank you all very much for coming this morning. Do have a happy new year. Thank you.